The crowd's angry murmurs swelled like a gathering storm as Willow Summers stood trembling on the wooden platform in the center of Great Bend, Kansas. Her wrists bound tightly behind her back, and tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. The year was 1878, and in this unforgiving frontier town, accusations of theft were taken as seriously as murder, perhaps even more so when the missing item was Sheriff Harkin's prized pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations. "I didn't take it." "Please, you have to believe me," Willow cried out, her voice nearly drowned by the hostile crowd demanding justice. Her long auburn hair whipped around her face in the hot summer wind, and her simple blue dress, once her Sunday best, was now wrinkled and stained from the night spent in the cramped jail cell. Sheriff Harkin stepped forward, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Miss Summers, you were seen leaving my office yesterday afternoon, and the watch disappeared at that same time. No one else entered." He held up a branding iron, its end shaped into the letter T for thief glowing an ominous red in the midday sun. "The law in Great Bend is clear. Those who steal must be marked so all honest folk can protect themselves." At 22, Willow had come to Great Bend only 6 months prior, seeking a fresh start after her parents' farm in Missouri had been lost to drought and debt. She'd secured a position as a seamstress at Mrs. Peterson's dress shop and had been slowly building a reputation as a hard-working, honest young woman. Until yesterday, when she delivered a mended vest to the sheriff's office and somehow found herself accused of a crime she hadn't committed. 1 minute. A deep voice cut through the crowd's noise like a knife. The sea of people parted reluctantly as a tall figure strode purposefully toward the platform. Jake Prescott moved with the easy confidence of a man who had faced worse situations than an angry mob. His dark Stetson cast a shadow over intense blue eyes that missed nothing as they swept across the scene. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim pants and the leather vest he wore over a faded blue shirt. The silver star pinned to his chest gleamed in the sunlight. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jake Prescott had arrived in Great Bend. "What's the meaning of this interruption, Marshal?" Sheriff Harkins demanded, lowering the branding iron slightly. "This is a local matter, not federal business." Jake removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "I believe in justice, Sheriff, and this doesn't look much like it." His gaze moved to Willow, noting her tear-streaked face and the defiant tilt of her chin despite her obvious fear. "She stole my grandfather's watch," Harkins insisted. "Only been in town 6 months and already showing her true colors." Jake climbed the steps to the platform with deliberate slowness. "Evidence? She was the only one in my office yesterday when it went missing," the sheriff replied, his jowls quivering with indignation. "That's circumstantial at best," Jake countered. He turned to Willow. "Miss Summers." "Willow Summers," she replied, her voice steadier now that someone seemed willing to listen. "Miss Summers, I'd like to hear your side of the story." Willow took a shaky breath. "I delivered Sheriff Harkin's mended vest to his office yesterday afternoon, just like Mrs. Peterson asked me to. I placed it on his desk, he thanked me, and I left. I never saw any pocket watch, and I certainly didn't take it." Jake nodded, then turned back to the sheriff. "Have you searched her living quarters?" "Of course. Found nothing, but that doesn't mean she didn't hide it elsewhere," Harkins retorted. "Or it could mean she's innocent," Jake suggested mildly, though his eyes had hardened. The marshal had ridden into Great Bend following the trail of the Delaney gang, 3 brothers who'd robbed their way across 3 states. He tracked them to the area, but hadn't expected to find a public branding upon his arrival. Something about this situation struck him as deeply wrong. "I have a suggestion," Jake announced, raising his voice to address the crowd. "Before any permanent marking is done, give me 2 days to investigate this matter. If Miss Summers is guilty, she'll face justice. If she's innocent, an irreparable wrong will have been avoided." Sheriff Harkins puffed up, his face reddening. "This is my jurisdiction, Marshal. You have no authority, actually," Jake interrupted smoothly. "Theft from a lawman can be considered interference with official duties, which puts it in federal territory. But I'm not looking to step on your toes, Sheriff. I'm offering my assistance in ensuring justice is properly served." The crowd, which had been baying for Willow's punishment moments before, now seemed uncertain. A few voices called out support for the marshal's suggestion. "2 days," an older man in the crowd said. "Seems fair to me, Sheriff. The girl ain't going nowhere." Harkins looked around at the shifting mood of the townspeople. He clearly didn't want to appear unreasonable. With visible reluctance, he lowered the branding iron completely. "2 days, Marshal. Then we proceed as planned if you find nothing." Jake nodded curtly and moved to untie Willow's bonds. "Thank you, Sheriff. Miss Summers will remain in my custody during the investigation." "What? No, she stays in the jail," Harkins protested. "That won't be necessary," Jake said firmly. "I'll take full responsibility for her. She can stay at the hotel under my supervision." As the crowd began to disperse, Jake gently guided Willow down the steps of the platform. She was shaking so badly he feared she might collapse. "Thank you," she whispered, rubbing her chafed wrists. "But why would you help me? You don't know me." Jake's expression softened slightly. "I've seen enough innocent people suffer in my time, Miss Summers. Besides, a woman who carries herself with dignity even on the branding platform deserves at least the benefit of doubt." He led her toward the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Great Bend, though that wasn't saying much in a frontier town. The 2-story wooden building boasted actual glass windows and a small dining room that served decent meals. "I can't afford to stay here," Willow protested as they approached the hotel's entrance. "Consider it a federal expense," Jake replied with a hint of a smile. "I need to keep an eye on you anyway." Inside, Jake arranged for 2 rooms, one for himself and one for Willow, directly across from each other in the upstairs hallway. The hotel owner, Mrs. Whitaker, a stern-faced widow with a reputation for running a respectable establishment, eyed Willow suspiciously. "I don't want any trouble, Marshal," she warned. "There won't be any," Jake assured her. "Miss Summers is under my protection while I investigate a matter of justice." Once they were alone in the hallway, Jake spoke in a low voice. "Get some rest, Miss Summers. Tomorrow morning, we'll start asking questions around town. I want to know everyone who visited the sheriff's office yesterday and who might have had access to that watch." Willow nodded, fatigue evident in every line of her body. "Why do I feel like there's more to your interest in this case than simple justice, Marshal Prescott?" Jake's expression turned enigmatic. "Let's just say I've been tracking some men who specialize in making other people look guilty for their crimes. Rest now. We have work to do tomorrow." As Willow entered her room, she couldn't help but wonder if fate had sent Jake Prescott to Great Bend just in time to save her, or if there were darker forces at work that might yet see her branded as a thief. The next morning, Willow awoke to sunlight streaming through the window of her hotel room. For a moment, she was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings: the clean white sheets, the polished wooden furniture, the rag rug beneath her feet as she slipped out of bed. She was accustomed to her tiny room above Mrs. Peterson's shop, with its narrow cot and single trunk containing all her worldly possessions. Reality crashed back as she remembered the events of the previous day. The accusation, the platform, the crowd hungry for her punishment, and the timely arrival of Marshal Jake Prescott. Her hand instinctively moved to her cheek, feeling the smooth skin that had so nearly been marred forever with the shameful brand of a thief. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Summers, it's Marshal Prescott. Are you decent?" Willow hastily smoothed her wrinkled dress, wishing she had a change of clothes. "One moment, please." She splashed water on her face from the basin on the dresser and attempted to tame her tangled hair with her fingers before opening the door. Jake Prescott stood in the hallway, looking fresh despite what must have been a long journey the previous day. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was damp and neatly combed. He held a bundle in his arms. "I took the liberty of asking Mrs. Peterson to send over some of your things," he explained, handing her the package. "I thought you might want a change of clothes." Willow accepted the bundle gratefully. "Thank you. That was very thoughtful. I'll wait for you downstairs. Mrs. Whittaker serves breakfast until 9. He tipped his hat slightly and turned to go. "Marshal," Willow called after him. When he paused and looked back, she continued, "I need you to know that I'm innocent. I didn't take that watch." Something flickered in Jake's blue eyes, something that might have been belief. "Let's find out who did, then." 30 minutes later, wearing a fresh green calico dress and with her hair neatly braided, Willow descended the hotel stairs to find Jake waiting in the small dining room. He rose when she entered, a gentlemanly gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. Over plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Jake outlined his plan. "First, we need to establish everyone who had access to the sheriff's office yesterday. Then we need to find out if anyone saw anything unusual. And most importantly, we need to determine if there's anyone in town who might want to see you falsely accused." Willow frowned. "But why would anyone want to harm me? I keep to myself, do my work, and attend church on Sundays. I've barely made any friends here, let alone enemies." "Sometimes it's not about you personally," Jake explained. "It could be about distracting from something else, creating a spectacle to cover other activities." "Like what?" Willow asked, intrigued despite her worries. Jake hesitated before responding. "The Delaney brothers, 3 outlaws I've been tracking, were spotted near Great Bend 2 days ago. They're known for robbery, but they're clever about it. They create diversions, plant evidence, manipulate local law enforcement. You think they took the sheriff's watch?" Willow whispered, mindful of other diners nearby. "I think it's worth considering, but let's not get ahead of ourselves." Jake drained his coffee cup and stood. "Our first stop is the sheriff's office. I want to examine the scene myself." Sheriff Harkins was visibly displeased to see them when they entered his office later that morning. He sat behind a large oak desk, his substantial frame filling the chair to capacity, his fingers drumming impatiently as Jake explained his intention to examine the office. "This is a waste of time, Marshal," Harkins grumbled. "The girl was the only one who had the opportunity." "Humor me," Jake replied, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. While Jake carefully inspected the office, asking questions about the layout and routine of the sheriff's day, Willow stood awkwardly by the door, feeling Harkins' accusatory gaze like a physical weight. "Where exactly was the watch when you last saw it?" Jake asked, standing by the desk. Harkins pointed to a spot near some papers. "Right there. I always set it down when I'm doing paperwork. It was my grandfather's gold case with an inscription inside. Time reveals truth. Been in my family for generations." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "And the window, was it open or closed?" "Closed. It's been too hot for open windows lately," Harkins replied. Jake moved to examine the window behind the desk. It faced an alley that ran between the sheriff's office and the adjacent building, which housed the town's small bank. The window appeared securely latched. "Anyone else have keys to this office?" Jake continued. "Just my deputy, Collins, but he was out checking on a property dispute at the Peterson farm all afternoon yesterday." Jake turned to Willow. "Miss Summers, walk me through exactly what you did when you came in yesterday." Under Sheriff Harkin's scowling observation, Willow carefully reconstructed her brief visit. "I entered through the front door, carrying the sheriff's mended vest. He was sitting at his desk writing something. I said, 'Good afternoon, Sheriff. I've brought your vest from Mrs. Peterson.' He looked up, nodded, and I placed the vest here." She indicated a spot on the corner of the desk. "He thanked me. I curtsied slightly, as Mrs. Peterson has taught me to do with customers, and I left. The entire interaction took less than a minute." Jake's gaze moved from the desk to the window and back again. Something seemed to be forming in his mind. "Sheriff, you said the watch disappeared yesterday afternoon. What time exactly did you notice it was missing?" "Around 4 o'clock, I reckon. The girl came by just after 3. "And between Miss Summers' visit and your discovery that the watch was missing, did anyone else enter this office?" Harkin scoffed. "No one. I was here the whole time, except for when I stepped out back for about 5 minutes around 3:30. Jake's eyes narrowed at this new information. "You didn't mention stepping out before. Didn't seem important," Harkins muttered defensively. "A man's entitled to a private moment now and again." "Indeed," Jake agreed mildly. "So the office was unattended for 5 minutes after Miss Summers left. The door was locked," Harkins insisted. "I always lock up when I step out, even for a minute. No one could have entered." "Unless they had a key or entered another way," Jake suggested, glancing meaningfully at the window. After leaving the sheriff's office, Jake led Willow down the alley he'd observed from the window. It was narrow and littered with crates and barrels, but clear enough to walk through. Jake examined the ground carefully, occasionally kneeling to inspect something only he could see. "What are you looking for?" Willow asked, curious despite her anxiety about the investigation's outcome. "Signs that someone used this alley recently," Jake replied, his eyes fixed on the dirt beneath their feet. "Footprints, disturbed dust, anything unusual." Near the area directly behind the sheriff's window, Jake paused. "Look here," he said, pointing to several small shiny objects embedded in the packed earth. "Glass fragments, recently broken." Willow peered at the tiny shards from the window, but Sheriff Harkins said it was closed and latched. "And now we know why." Jake straightened up. "Someone cut the glass, reached in to unlatch it, entered while the sheriff was out back, took the watch, and relocked the window on their way out. When they replaced the glass, they likely used a bit of clear wax to hold it in place, which would melt in this heat and be unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. That's quite elaborate for stealing a pocket watch," Willow observed. "Unless the watch wasn't the primary target," Jake replied thoughtfully. "Remember what I said about diversions?" They continued their investigation throughout the day, speaking with townspeople who might have seen something unusual around the sheriff's office the previous afternoon. Most interactions began coldly, with suspicious glances directed at Willow, but Jake's authoritative presence and fair questioning gradually softened some attitudes. By late afternoon, they had spoken with the banker, whose window faced the alley, the bartender at the saloon across the street, who had a good view of the sheriff's front door, and several shopkeepers nearby. No one had seen anything particularly suspicious, though the banker mentioned seeing a stranger loitering in the alley briefly. "Tall fellow, well-dressed, Mr. Parsons," the banker had said. "Thought it odd him being in the alley like that, but he was gone before I could think much of it." As the sun began to set, Jake and Willow found themselves at the town's only restaurant, sharing a quiet dinner. Willow picked at her food, her appetite diminished by worry. "We've only got one more day," she said softly. if we don't find the watch or prove my innocence." Jake reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his own. The gesture was surprising and oddly comforting. "We'll find it, Miss Summers. The truth has a way of coming to light." Something in his confident tone helped calm the storm of fear inside her. When she looked up into his eyes, she saw not just determination but a warmth that made her breath catch. For the first time since the accusation, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. "Why are you really helping me, Marshal?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I've seen innocent people condemned before. My sister was accused of stealing from the general store where she worked when I was 15. The owner's son had taken the money, but my sister was blamed. She was run out of town, her reputation ruined." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I swore then that I'd never stand by and watch an innocent person suffer if I could help it." "I'm sorry about your sister," Willow said genuinely. "Emma's doing well now," Jake assured her with a small smile. "Married a good man in Colorado, has 3 children. But she never fully recovered from the shame of being falsely accused." His eyes met Willow's directly. "That's not going to happen to you. I promise." The intensity of his gaze made Willow's heart beat faster, and she found herself believing him despite the overwhelming odds against them. As they walked back to the hotel in the gathering darkness, Jake suddenly gripped Willow's arm and pulled her into the shadow of a building. Before she could question him, he placed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. 3 men had emerged from the saloon across the street. They stood in a tight circle, speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing around as if to ensure they weren't being overheard. "The Delaney brothers," Jake whispered, his mouth close to Willow's ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine despite the warm evening. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, Willow could see the family resemblance between the men, all tall and broad-shouldered, with similar features beneath their various styles of facial hair. "I thought they might still be in town," Jake continued quietly. "They usually linger after a job, blending in, waiting for any pursuit to die down before moving on." "What are they saying?" Willow whispered back, straining to hear. Jake shook his head. "Too far away. But their presence confirms my suspicions. We need to watch them carefully." The brothers soon separated, with 2 heading back into the saloon and 1 walking in the direction of the livery stable. "Let's get back to the hotel," Jake suggested. "Tomorrow is going to be a busy day." That night, alone in her room, Willow found sleep elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the branding iron glowing red in Sheriff Harkin's hand, felt the heat of it approaching her face. And then, strangely, her thoughts would shift to Jake Prescott, the confidence in his voice when he promised to clear her name, the surprising gentleness of his hand covering hers at dinner, the determination in his blue eyes. A man she'd known for barely a day had become her only hope for salvation. The realization was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Willow rose early the next morning, driven by the knowledge that this was her last day of freedom if Jake couldn't prove her innocence. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim, as if proper appearance might somehow influence fate in her favor. Jake was already waiting in the hotel lobby when she descended the stairs. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much either, but his smile was warm when he saw her. "Good morning, Miss Summers," he greeted her, rising from his chair. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Willow replied with a small smile of her own. "And please call me Willow. After all you're doing for me, formality seems unnecessary." Something flickered in Jake's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "Willow, then, and I'm Jake." He offered his arm, which she took with only slight hesitation. "We have a busy day ahead." After a quick breakfast, They made their way to the livery stable, where Jake had spotted one of the Delaney brothers heading the previous night. The stable master, a wizened old man named Silas, was brushing down a bay mare when they entered. He looked up, squinting at them in the dim light filtered through dusty windows. "Marshal," he acknowledged Jake with a nod. "Heard you're looking into the sheriff's missing watch." "Among other things," Jake replied casually. "I'm also tracking 3 men brothers who I believe might be in town. Tall fellows, well-dressed for cowboys, might have been keeping horses here." Silas scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Could be the 3 gents who arrived about 4 days ago, said they were cattle buyers. Paid for a week's board for their horses up front, good money too." "Did they come by yesterday afternoon around 3 or 4 o'clock?" Jake pressed. "One of 'em did, the youngest, I think. Eddie, he called himself. Came to check on his horse, said the animal seemed skittish." Silas shrugged. "Didn't think nothing of it." Jake and Willow exchanged a meaningful glance. The timing aligned perfectly with the theft of the watch. "Did this Eddie leave anything here or take anything with him?" Jake asked. Silas thought for a moment. "Come to think of it, he did have a small package when he left, about the size of a deck of cards, wrapped in cloth. Said it was medicine for his brother's cough." "Or a pocket watch," Willow thought, hope rising in her chest. They spent the next hour tracking the movements of the Delaney brothers around town. The hotel owner confirmed they were staying there under the name Smith, apparently not even bothering with different surnames. The saloon keeper recalled them spending freely, buying drinks for locals, and asking casual questions about the town's businesses, particularly the bank's schedule for money transfers. By midday, Jake and Willow found themselves outside the small boarding house where Deputy Collins lived. Jake had decided it was time to bring someone else from law enforcement into their investigation, someone who wasn't Sheriff Harkins. Deputy Collins was a young man, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and an earnest expression. He listened intently as Jake explained his suspicions about the Delaney brothers and their possible connection to the missing watch. "I've had my doubts about Miss Summers' guilt," Collins admitted. "She's always seemed honest in my dealings with her, but the sheriff was so convinced." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Sheriff Harkins is a proud man," Jake said diplomatically. "And when something precious to him was taken, he wanted quick justice. But I believe the Delaneys are using the situation as a distraction while they plan something bigger." "The bank," Collins said suddenly, understanding dawning. "There's a payroll coming in tomorrow for the railroad workers, over $5,000. Jake nodded grimly. "That would be worth creating a diversion for. The whole town focused on a public branding while they quietly empty the safe." "But we still don't have proof they took the watch," Willow reminded them, her stomach knotting with anxiety. "And my time is running out." Jake's expression hardened with determination. "Then let's get that proof. Deputy, I need your help." As the afternoon wore on, the 3 put Jake's plan into action. Deputy Collins approached the Delaney brothers in the saloon, making a show of buying them drinks and expressing admiration for their fine clothes and apparent prosperity. Meanwhile, Jake and Willow slipped into the hotel and, with the reluctant cooperation of Mrs. Whittaker, accessed the room where the brothers were staying. The search was quick and methodical. Jake checked under mattresses, behind drawers, and in every possible hiding place while Willow kept watch at the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the hotel. "Nothing," Jake muttered in frustration after several tense minutes. "They must keep valuables on them." As they were about to give up, Willow noticed something odd about the floorboard near the washstand. "Jake," she whispered urgently, pointing. "That board, it looks slightly raised." Jake knelt and examined the floorboard, then carefully pried it up with his knife. Beneath it was a small cloth bundle. With steady hands, Jake unwrapped it to reveal Sheriff Harkin's gold pocket watch. "You found it," Willow gasped, relief washing over her like a wave. Jake rewrapped the watch and tucked it into his pocket, then carefully replaced the floorboard. "Not just the watch," he said, holding up several other small items: a lady's brooch, a silver snuff box, and a man's signet ring. "Looks like they've been busy since arriving in town." They slipped out of the room and hurried back to meet Deputy Collins, who had managed to keep the Delaney's occupied with tales of local cattle prices and speculation about the upcoming railroad expansion. With the evidence securely in Jake's possession, they made their way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Harkins was initially skeptical of their claims, but his expression changed dramatically when Jake produced the gold watch. "My grandfather's watch," he breathed, taking it reverently. He opened the case, checking the inscription inside. "Where did you find it?" Jake explained their investigation and findings, with Deputy Collins corroborating the parts he had witnessed. As the full picture emerged, the Delaney brothers using the theft and Willow's accusation as a distraction for their planned bank robbery. Sheriff Harkin's face darkened with anger, though whether at the Delaneys or at himself for being manipulated was unclear. "Miss Summers," he said finally, turning to Willow, "it appears I owe you an apology. I was hasty in my judgment." Willow, who had been standing quietly by the door, lifted her chin slightly. "Thank you for acknowledging that, Sheriff." "We need to arrest the Delaney brothers immediately," Jake urged, "before they realize we're onto them." Sheriff Harkins nodded, his professional instincts taking over. "Collins, gather a few trustworthy men. We'll take them at the saloon." As the sheriff and his deputy prepared for the arrests, Jake turned to Willow. "You should go back to the hotel. This could get dangerous." Willow shook her head firmly. "I've been part of this investigation from the beginning. I want to see it through to the end." Jake started to protest, but something in her determined expression stopped him. "Stay behind me then," he conceded. "And if there's trouble, run." The confrontation at the saloon unfolded with surprising swiftness. The Delaney brothers, caught off guard by the arrival of armed lawmen, attempted to draw their weapons but found themselves outnumbered and surrounded. Within minutes, they were disarmed and in custody. As they were led away to the jail, the eldest brother, Frank Delaney, glared at Jake with venomous hatred. "This ain't over, Prescott. We got friends who'll come looking." "They'll find you behind bars in a federal prison," Jake replied evenly. The news of the Delaney's arrest and Willow's exoneration spread through Great Bend like wildfire. By evening, the same townspeople who had been calling for her punishment were expressing indignation that she had been falsely accused. Several even stopped by the hotel to offer personal apologies, which Willow accepted with quiet dignity. That night, Jake and Willow celebrated her vindication with dinner at the hotel's restaurant. The other diners nodded respectfully as they entered, some even raising glasses in Willow's direction. "How does it feel to be the town hero instead of its villain?" Jake asked as they settled at their table. Willow laughed softly, the sound musical after so many days of tension. "Strange. But I'm more grateful than anything else." Her expression grew serious as she looked across at him. "If you hadn't arrived when you did." "But I did," Jake said simply. "Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been forming since that first moment on the branding platform. "What happens now?" Willow asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Jake took a sip of his coffee before answering. "The Delaneys will be transported to Topeka for trial. I'll need to accompany them, give testimony." "And then?" Willow pressed gently. Back to tracking outlaws across the frontier, a shadow crossed Jake's features. It's what I do, what I've done for 5 years now. It must be a lonely life, Willow observed, not unkindly. Jake's smile was tinged with melancholy. It has its moments. But yes, there are times when I wonder what it might be like to stay in one place, to build something lasting. The candlelight caught the amber flecks in Willow's green eyes as she regarded him thoughtfully. Great Bend could use a man with your sense of justice. Are you suggesting I consider a career change, Miss Summers? Jake's tone was teasing, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely dismissing the idea. I'm suggesting you consider possibilities, Willow replied with a small smile. Life has a way of offering unexpected paths when we least expect them. As they walked back to their rooms after dinner, a comfortable silence between them, Jake found himself considering those possibilities more seriously than he had in years. The Delaney case was closed, but something else had opened, something he hadn't been looking for but now couldn't imagine walking away from. At her door, Willow turned to face him. Thank you, Jake. Not just for saving me from the brand, but for believing in me when no one else would. You made it easy to believe in you, Jake replied softly. You never lost your dignity, even when facing the worst. Impulsively, Willow rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Marshal Prescott. Jake stood motionless in the hallway long after her door had closed, his fingers touching the spot where her lips had been, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted in his world. The following week passed in a blur of activity. The Delaney brothers were held in the Great Bend jail while arrangements were made for their transport to Topeka. Jake sent telegrams to his superiors and received orders to personally escort the prisoners to the federal courthouse. During this time, Willow returned to her position at Mrs. Peterson's dress shop, where she was welcomed back with tearful apologies from her employer. The townsfolk, eager to make amends for their hasty judgment, brought her more work than she could handle: dresses to be altered, shirts to be mended, even a wedding gown to be created from scratch. Despite their busy schedules, Jake and Willow found time to see each other daily. Sometimes it was just coffee in the morning at the hotel restaurant. Other times, a walk along the creek that ran behind the town as the summer evening cooled. They spoke of their childhoods: Jake's on a struggling farm in Missouri, Willow's as the daughter of a teacher in a small Illinois town. They shared dreams and disappointments, gradually weaving their separate stories into a shared narrative. With each passing day, the inevitable moment of Jake's departure loomed larger. The transport was scheduled for Monday, just 3 days away, and neither had spoken directly about what might happen afterward. On Friday evening, Jake invited Willow to dinner at the best restaurant in town, a modest establishment by city standards, but considered quite elegant in Great Bend. She wore her newest creation, a dress of soft lavender cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs that she had worked on late into the previous night. Jake's appreciative gaze, when she met him in the hotel lobby, told her the effort had been worthwhile. He himself had visited the barber that afternoon and wore a new black jacket over a crisp white shirt. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. The restaurant had prepared a special table for them, with fresh wildflowers and candles, creating an intimate atmosphere in a corner away from other diners. As they enjoyed a meal far superior to the usual frontier fare, Jake seemed preoccupied, his usual easy conversation replaced by thoughtful silences. Is something troubling you? Willow finally asked as they were finishing dessert, a surprisingly good apple pie with fresh cream. Jake set down his fork and met her gaze directly. I've been thinking about what happens after I leave on Monday. Willow's heart constricted painfully, but she kept her expression composed. "I imagine you'll be assigned another case, more outlaws to track." "That's what would normally happen," Jake agreed. "But I've been considering other options." Willow waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I've telegraphed my superior in Topeka," Jake continued. "There's an opening for a federal marshal based in this region, someone to handle cases in western Kansas and parts of Colorado. It would mean less traveling, a more settled position." Hope bloomed in Willow's chest. "And you're considering it?" "I've accepted it," Jake said, a smile spreading across his features, "if certain other conditions can be met." "What conditions?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Willow, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I feel as if I've been searching for you my whole life without realizing it. When I saw you standing on that platform, facing an unjust accusation with such courage, something changed in me." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as she squeezed his hand in response. "I'm not a man of grand fortunes or fancy words," Jake continued, "but I am a man who knows his own heart, and my heart tells me that life without you would be hollow, no matter where my duties might take me." He released her hand and reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a slender gold ring with a modest pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The only thing of value she left behind when she passed." Willow's free hand flew to her mouth as understanding dawned. "Willow Summers, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Jake asked, his usually confident voice tinged with vulnerability. For a moment, Willow couldn't speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Then, with tears spilling freely down her cheeks, she nodded. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes, Jake Prescott, I will marry you." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The restaurant's other patrons, who had fallen silent during this exchange, burst into spontaneous applause. As they walked back to the hotel later that evening, Willow marveled at the turn her life had taken. Just over a week ago, she had been facing public disgrace and permanent disfigurement. Now, she was engaged to a man who had not only saved her from that fate, but had shown her what love could truly be. "When do you think we might marry?" she asked, her arm linked through his as they strolled beneath the star-filled Kansas sky. "I need to complete this assignment delivering the Delaney's to Topeka and testifying at their preliminary hearing," Jake replied. "That should take no more than 2 weeks. After that, I'll be officially reassigned to this region." He glanced down at her, his expression tender in the moonlight. "Would a September wedding suit you? Perhaps when the weather begins to cool." "September would be perfect," Willow agreed, leaning slightly against his solid presence beside her. "It will give me time to make my dress," Jake chuckled. "Mrs. Peterson will likely insist on closing the shop for a day to celebrate her seamstress's wedding. She's already hinting that we should use the rooms above the shop as our first home," Willow admitted with a laugh. "She says a married marshal needs a proper home, not a hotel room." "She's not wrong," Jake mused. "Though I was thinking we might look at that small house on Oak Street, the one with the garden in back. It's for sale, and my new position comes with a decent salary." The thought of a real home, their home, filled Willow with a joy she hadn't dared imagine since coming to Great Bend. "I'd like that very much." When they reached the hotel, Jake walked her to her room as he had every night that week. This time, however, when she turned to bid him good night, he cradled her face gently in his hands and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, a question rather than a demand. When Willow responded, rising on her tiptoes and sliding her arms around his neck, It deepened into something more passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. "Good night, my love," Jake whispered when they finally parted, both breathless. "Good night," Willow replied softly, her heart too full for more words. That night, as she lay in bed watching moonlight filter through the curtains, Willow reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her to this moment. The false accusation that had nearly ruined her had instead brought her the greatest happiness she could imagine. Sometimes, she thought sleepily as she drifted toward dreams, fate worked in ways too mysterious to understand but too perfect to question. The following Monday dawned clear and warm. Jake had spent the weekend preparing for the prisoner transport, arranging for additional deputies to accompany them, and securing the special wagon that would carry the Delaney brothers to Topeka. Willow had busied herself with work at Mrs. Peterson's shop, though her mind was never far from thoughts of Jake and their future together. As the departure time approached, Willow made her way to the sheriff's office, where a small crowd had gathered to watch the notorious outlaws being loaded into the transport wagon. The Delaney brothers, hands and feet shackled, scowled as they were led from the jail. Jake stood nearby, his expression stern and professional, every inch the federal marshal. When he spotted Willow in the crowd, however, his features softened momentarily. He made his way to her side. "I need to go," he said quietly, taking her hands in his. "I'll be back as soon as I can, 2 weeks at most." "I'll be waiting," Willow promised, squeezing his hands. "Be careful, Jake. Always am." He smiled and, ignoring the curious onlookers, leaned down to kiss her briefly. "Keep planning that wedding. I want everything to be perfect for you." Willow watched as Jake mounted his horse and gave the signal for the wagon to move out. As the dust settled behind the departing procession, she touched the pearl ring on her finger and offered a silent prayer for his safe return. The days that followed passed more slowly than Willow could have imagined. She threw herself into her work, creating not only her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with lace trim, but also beginning to make curtains and linens for the house on Oak Street, which Jake had arranged to purchase before his departure. Sheriff Harkins, perhaps still feeling guilty over his treatment of Willow, proved unexpectedly helpful, arranging for the house to be cleaned and minor repairs made while Jake was away. Deputy Collins and his wife invited Willow to Sunday dinner, where they insisted on discussing plans for a wedding celebration that seemed to grow more elaborate with each passing hour. "The whole town will want to attend," Mrs. Collins declared. "After everything that happened, folks are eager to show their support." Willow, who had envisioned a small, quiet ceremony, found herself swept along by the community's enthusiasm. It was as if Great Bend, having nearly committed a terrible injustice against her, was determined to make amends by embracing her wholeheartedly. Letters arrived from Jake every few days, carried by the stagecoach from Topeka. He wrote of the successful delivery of the prisoners, the beginning of their trial proceedings, and his impatience to return to Great Bend to her. Each letter ended the same way: "With all my love, Jake." Willow kept the letters in a small wooden box beside her bed, reading them each night before falling asleep. Though she had known Jake for less than a month, she felt as if they had been connected far longer, as if his soul and hers had recognized each other instantly across a crowded town square. 16 days after Jake's departure, 2 days longer than he had estimated, Willow heard the pounding of hooves on the main street outside Mrs. Peterson's shop. She looked up from her sewing to see a dust-covered rider dismounting in front of the store. Her heart leapt as she recognized Jake's tall figure. Abandoning her work, she ran to the door just as he was opening it. Without a word, he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of long days of separation and the joy of reunion. "You're back," Willow breathed when he finally set her down, though he kept his arms around her waist. "I came straight here from Topeka," Jake said, his voice rough with fatigue but his eyes bright with happiness. "Rode through the night, Mrs. Peterson, watching from behind her counter with misty eyes, cleared her throat. "Perhaps you two would like some privacy," she suggested, gesturing toward the back room. "I can mind the front for a while." In the back room, surrounded by bolts of fabric and half-finished garments, Jake pulled Willow close again. "I missed you more than I can say," he murmured against her hair. "And I you," Willow replied, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the dust of the trail. "Is everything settled with the Delaney's?" Jake nodded. "They've been formally charged with multiple counts of theft and attempted bank robbery. The evidence was overwhelming. They'll be spending many years in prison." He stepped back slightly, his hand still resting on her waist. "But more importantly, my reassignment is official. I'm now the federal marshal for this region, based right here in Great Bend." Willow's smile was radiant. "Then everything is exactly as we hoped." "Almost," Jake corrected with a grin. "There's still the matter of a wedding to arrange." "About that," Willow began hesitantly. "It seems the town has taken quite an interest in our plans. Mrs. Collins is suggesting a celebration in the town square with everyone invited, and Sheriff Harkins has offered to host a dinner afterward." Jake laughed, the sound warming Willow's heart. "I suppose we've become something of a local legend, the marshal who saved the innocent seamstress from a thief's brand, only to lose his heart to her in the process." "Does it bother you?" Willow asked. "All the attention." Jake shook his head, his expression growing serious. "All that matters to me is that you become my wife, Willow Summers. Whether it's in front of the whole town or just the preacher and a couple of witnesses, I care only that at the end of the day, you're Mrs. Jake Prescott." "Then let them have their celebration," Willow decided. "Great Bend has become my home, our home. And these people, for all their initial misjudgment, have shown their better nature in how they've embraced us since." The wedding of Marshal Jake Prescott and Miss Willow Summers took place on the first Saturday in September 1878 in the Great Bend town square. The weather cooperated beautifully, providing clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Willow's dress, the culmination of weeks of careful stitching, drew gasps of admiration as she walked from Mrs. Peterson's shop to where Jake waited beneath an arch of greenery and wildflowers. The simple ivory silk glowed in the afternoon sunlight, and the lace veil that covered her auburn hair, borrowed from Mrs. Collins, added an ethereal quality to her appearance. Jake, standing tall and proud in a new black suit, watched her approach with an expression of such undisguised love that several of the town's more romantic ladies dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Reverend Thomas spoke of the mysterious workings of Providence that had brought these two souls together under such unusual circumstances. Jake and Willow exchanged simple vows and rings, his a plain gold band that matched her pearl ring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas concluded with a broad smile. "Marshal Prescott, you may kiss your bride." The cheer that erupted from the assembled townspeople, as Jake pulled Willow into a tender kiss, seemed to encompass not just celebration of their union, but also relief at how near a tragedy had been averted and joy at the happy outcome that had instead unfolded. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up in the town square for a communal feast to which everyone had contributed something. There was music from local fiddle players, dancing on the wooden platform that had once been meant for Willow's public humiliation, and toasts to the new couple's health and happiness. As twilight deepened into night, Jake took Willow's hand. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Prescott?" he asked softly. Home. The word held such promise now. Together they slipped away from the festivities, walking hand in hand toward the small house on Oak Street that was now theirs. Yellow lamplight glowed in the windows. Mrs. Peterson had gone ahead to light the lamps for them, and a wreath of fall flowers decorated the front door. On the threshold, Jake paused. "One last tradition," he said with a smile, and swept Willow into his arms to carry her over the threshold. Inside, the house was simple but welcoming, with the curtains Willow had sewn hanging at the windows and a quilt from Jake's sister spread across the bed in the small bedroom. A fire had been laid in the hearth, ready for lighting, and a basket of food enough for several days sat on the kitchen table. "It's perfect," Willow whispered, taking in what would be their first real home together. Jake set her down gently but kept his arms around her. "No," he corrected, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're perfect, and I still can't quite believe that you're my wife." As his lips found hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Willow knew with absolute certainty that everything, the false accusation, the near branding, the investigation, had led exactly where it was meant to. This moment, this man, this love. In the years that followed, Jake and Willow Prescott became fixtures in Great Bend. Jake's reputation as a fair but firm marshal brought stability to the region, and Willow's dress shop, which she opened a year after their wedding when Mrs. Peterson retired, became known throughout western Kansas for quality workmanship. Their first child, a son they named Samuel after Jake's father, was born in the summer of 1880. He was followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and girl named Thomas and Emma. Their family was completed in 1885 with the arrival of another daughter, Grace. The house on Oak Street expanded with their family, with Jake adding rooms as needed and Willow creating a home filled with warmth and laughter. The garden behind the house became Willow's particular joy, producing vegetables for their table and flowers that made their home the envy of neighbors. Sheriff Harkins, who had nearly branded Willow as a thief, became one of their closest friends and the godfather to their eldest son. He never tired of telling the story of how Jake Prescott had ridden into town just in time to prevent a terrible miscarriage of justice, though as the years passed, his role in the tale became somewhat more heroic than it had been in reality. The gold pocket watch that had nearly cost Willow her reputation became a symbol of their unlikely love story. Sheriff Harkins gifted it to Jake on the 5th anniversary of their wedding, inscribed now with not only "Time reveals truth," but also, "And truth reveals love." Jake kept it in his pocket every day thereafter, a constant reminder of how close he had come to riding past Great Bend without stopping, and how grateful he was that fate had intervened. On warm summer evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, Jake and Willow would often sit on their front porch, hands clasped, as they watched the sunset paint the Kansas sky in brilliant hues. Sometimes they spoke of the day they met, marveling at how something so potentially tragic had transformed into the greatest blessing of their lives. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into town that day?" Willow would sometimes ask, though she knew his answer by heart, and Jake would always reply, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her fingers where her mother's pearl ring still glinted. "I don't need to wonder, my love. Some things are simply meant to be."